This week's podcast episode is brought to you by Insuring Income. Insuring Income is your source for all things term life insurance and own occupation disability insurance. Insuring Income has a relationship with America's top-rated term life insurance and disability insurance companies so that pharmacists like you can easily find the best solutions for your personal situation. To better serve you, Insuring Income reviews all applicable carriers in the marketplace for your desired coverage, supports clients in all 50 states, and makes sure all of your questions get answered along the way. To get quotes and apply for term, life, or disability insurance, see sample contracts from disability carriers, or learn more about these topics, visit insuringincome.com/your financial pharmacist. Again, that's insuringincome.com/your financial pharmacist.
When considering your financial future, there is a space for you to take a job that pays you less if the trajectory, if the potential plan of that path could pay you a whole lot more. Because the reality is that as a clinician, your salary is not going to dramatically increase.
You're listening to the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, a show all about inspiring you, the pharmacy professional, on your path towards achieving financial freedom. Hi, I'm Tim Albrecht, and on this week's show, I welcome Alex Barker, the founder of the Happy PharmD. We talk about his takeaways from the recently released 2021 Pharmacist Salary Guide, including the current state of the job market, trends in salary and compensation, and contributors to job stress and dissatisfaction. Grab your copy of the 2021 Pharmacist Salary Guide by going to thehappypharmd.com/YFP. Again, that's thehappypharmd.com/YFP. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I enjoy hanging out with you.
It's been a while, specifically episode 92, when we talked about creating an indispensable pharmacy career all the way back in March of 2019. But for those in our audience that may not know you, I know many folks do know you and the work that you're doing with the Happy PharmD, but tell us a little bit about your pharmacy career and the work that you are currently doing with the Happy PharmD.
Happy to, but first I want to acknowledge, was it episode 92?
92.
So you had me on 100 episodes later.
Nailed it.
Wow, good job.
That was planned. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Alex Barker. I'm a pharmacist. I graduated in 2012, did a residency, went into clinical practice, did not enjoy myself, and struggled to find my way with my career. That led me to business, led me to coaching people, led me to creating a few other media companies and other crazy random ideas. And then I saw, unfortunately, the need of our profession. A lot of people are burned out. A lot of people are unhappy, unfulfilled in their positions. So I took coaching along with our profession and kind of married it into this Happy PharmD, where we help pharmacists and coach them into better careers and jobs. Doing that since 2017 now.
Wow.
We've got, yeah, it's crazy. I mean,
It is.
if it was back in 2019 that I was last here, I think we only had maybe 4 coaches, including myself. We now have 11, and we have an awesome team, support team. We're doing research. Lots of crazy stuff. And a good colleague of yours now is our lead coach, Jackie Boyle.
Yes.
Who is at Neomed in Ohio. So yeah, that's what we do here at the Happy PharmD. And I know why you brought me on was to go over trends and what's going on in the job market and specifically in pharmacists' salaries. So happy to be here.
Awesome. And for those not familiar, make sure you check it out, thehappypharmd.com. We'll link to it in the show notes. And Alex, as you mentioned, today is a topic that I know is of interest to our community, one that I enjoy talking about on the show, as well as our folks are certainly interested in what's happening in the job market, what's happening with the current state of jobs. And you have an incredible annual salary guide, of which we will link to in the show notes. And I mentioned in the introduction that distills data about pharmacist salary changes, job stress, job satisfaction, and overall the pharmacy job market. And one of the things you talk about in there, which we'll get to towards the end of the show, is the perfect storm and what that means as it relates to where we are as a profession. So you've been doing this now for several years. Is that right, Alex, the salary guide?
Since 2015, which meant we were looking at 2014 data. So yes, we've been doing this many, many years. We have a lot of data and frankly it's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little frustrating. But we've got a good, you'll be able to see in charts and graphs, you'll be able to compare yourself to others. I'd recommend you look at yourself where you're at rather than the trends as a whole, but we can dive into those here. Where would you like to head first?
Yeah. So my first question, Alex, is, there's other resources out there, a couple that come to mind. Several state associations do this. I know we do here in Ohio. There's the Pharmacy Workforce Survey, which I believe happens every 5 years. One published last year. So what's the need for this? Tell me more about why you felt like there was a gap and an opportunity to fill that gap with this resource.
So one of the things that I like to do whenever I'm looking at a complex problem is multiple resources. You know what? That's not really unique. I think every pharmacist does that, especially when we're researching a disease state or a new drug. We got to have the whole picture, right? And one of the things that frustrated me about the multiple reports were the indiscrepancies and the different numbers. So I didn't really see anyone else putting all of this information together in one place. So that's why I started way back in 2015 working on this report. I think I published it originally on Pharmacy Times, and we had since now put it on our website because obviously we weren't around in 2015. I like looking at seeing multiple sources of data, multiple reports to see and to look for those trends, right? Because I think we all have hearsay and secondhand stories of
Absolutely.
what's happening in the job market. And there is some truth to that. And we actually have some solid data for some of those hearsay stories. But overall, we can say that pharmacists are still well paid. We're still in the 6-figure range. We are continuing to see a very small overall increase in our pay, albeit that it is very slow and it is slower in comparison to the majority of other health professions.
Mm-hmm.
But we are seeing some trends that we should all be aware of when it comes to salary changes.
And Alex, one of those that you talk about in the guide that I know is something that is of interest to me and the financial plan, because these topics are very connected, I think for obvious reasons, is that when it comes to pharmacist salary, of course, we'd expect to see some differences based on experience, depending on areas of practice, of which we can dig into further. But one of the things you mentioned is that there's an extremely low ceiling for pharmacists. And this is one of those things, speaking of hearsay, that I have always thought is, of course, varies based on positions. And we know that in some areas there's more long-term upside and maybe some longer-term growth opportunities. But for many pharmacists, outside of cost of living adjustments, if that sometimes, that there's a relatively low ceiling of where you start, which is a great blessing, may not be too far off from where you end. And, that matters for a whole lot of reasons when we talk about the financial plan. So give me your read on that. Tell us more about what you found and why is that so significant?
We should be well aware as pharmacists, we are very well paid for just getting out of college. If you compare our education, the length of it, as well as the job market,
Mm-hmm.
and compare it to other similar professions, we are more likely to be paid higher. So according to a report by PayScale, which was the only one, unfortunately, that looked at years of experience with an annual average wage, you're looking at about 113,000 is the average starting salary for less than a year's experience, which is, insane. If you told that to a high schooler, you get their ears to perk up.
That's right.
However, if you add on years of experience, so if you work in the profession 20 plus years, according to this report, you're only adding about $12,000 more dollars per year to your salary, which I never realized that when I went through education. I never had my eyes open to that problem, but that should be a sinking feeling that it doesn't really matter how much harder you work. It doesn't matter how long you work with a company. Chances are your salary will not increase. In fact, for an institution that I worked for, it was very clear that after a certain amount of time, years of experience, that my salary would increase incrementally up to a point. And then at that point, I was locked at the rate at which, the cost of living increases, which in my area is very low. So
regardless of performance, regardless of performance, right?
Right, right. And I would not say that I was an above average pharmacist. I would say that I was just kind of in the middle, and it didn't matter. And what made me the most frustrated was that finding out the amount of money that people got for doing insanely well. We had
Mm.
a few amazing pharmacists on our team. They worked really, really hard. And I found out that their quote, when they exceeded expectations was the measure that they had to get in their annual review, that when they got that, it equated to about $1,500.
Mm.
$1,500. And if you take that, you divide it by the hours that you work,
Sure.
I mean, it isn't worth it. It isn't worth it at all
Yeah.
to even try harder. And so, what we've kind of created, unfortunately, in this perfect storm, one factor of it is we have a profession where we are not rewarded for effort. And that's disconcerting. It creates complacency, I would say, for sure. I mean, it did within me when I was a clinician.
Yeah, and I think especially at a time where you and I both know, we need some innovation, we need some risk taking, we need some great ideas coming forward. And compensation of course isn't the only way that's going to drive that, but certainly, a low ceiling as you mentioned in the report may subtly not encourage high performance. And I think that's a noteworthy thing. And of course, it goes without saying we're generalizing here as you look at this data across the profession. There are certainly areas of the profession where there's more upward mobility. I would use management, admin type of positions on the health system side as one example, but there are certainly others. And of course, when it comes to the financial plan, what screams to me here, Alex, is that you have to, if this is going to be true for your career and the trajectory, you have to be that much more diligent about the financial plan from day one, right? Because naturally, what happens is expenses are going to go up if we let them. And so over time, if expenses go up proportionally, but salary is not, we've got a problem in terms of being able to achieve all the financial goals that we do. Another way of looking at this is if we want to be a little bit more half glass full, is that you do have a great salary at a very young age coming out of school. And if you're able to keep those expenses down, you've got a long trajectory where that money can be saved. You can have compound growth and other things where, other professions, while there might be more upward trajectory, it might take them longer to get to a point of savings. But of course, we haven't talked about the 175K of debt that our graduates are taking on, and separate story for another day. So when we look at the pharmacist salary based on job sector, we know that there are a lot of avenues pharmacists can take in their pharmacy profession throughout their career. So tell us a little bit more about the variation you see in terms of jobs that have higher salary ranges, jobs that have lower salary ranges.
I don't think people will be too surprised, but perhaps maybe by the amount. So, based on where people are working and the kind of job that they're working, which, by the way, don't try to do this yourself. Okay, don't go to look at all these reports because they call pharmacists by different names. I mean, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a U.S. government organization, defines one of our professions as working at food and beverage stores.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, I'll be honest, I don't know what a food and beverage store is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a gas station, and they already have general merchandise stores and pharmacies and drugstores. So maybe I'm missing, I live in Michigan, so I haven't been all over in the world. I don't know what this is. So where are the great paying jobs? Like you said, it comes down to management jobs. They are clearly paid more. We're looking at ranges anywhere from $15,000 to even $25,000 more. We know that pharma jobs, particularly higher management jobs, pay extremely well. Nuclear pharmacist is one of the top paying patient care jobs. JobRx reported that their average was at $157,000, which is very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're also seeing similar trends that where there is more responsibility, so more prescribing ability, we see pharmacists being paid higher. So clinical pharmacist roles. Whereas where are we seeing the lowest paid pharmacists? We're seeing those typically in mail order and PBMs. We're seeing it in medical marijuana places, mail pharmacies, and as everyone would expect, we are seeing lower salaries trending downward in chains and, of course, independents, long-term care. Now, to clarify, everyone's got opinions on these things. I know of this person who got this, and I'm paid this.
Yeah.
It's trends. We have to keep all of this with, a grain of salt, because the reporting from each of these sources varies greatly. So I'm herding cats here, and I'm just telling you about my experience with it. Okay. It's challenging.
Sure. It is a good point. I mean, I hope our listeners will take it with a grain of salt, but it's a great opportunity to see what's out there. And what's of concern to me, Alex, is I'm thinking of the distribution of pharmacists by practice. And that first group that you mentioned, management, admin positions, industry, and nuclear pharmacy, I think were the three you mentioned. That is a small sliver of the pie, right? The bigger chunk of the pie is the community positions, is the managed care positions. And so I think it is something that we have to consider and we have to take seriously in terms of the significance. Now, hearsay, speaking of hearsay, one thing I have heard that I think is easy for us to hear and say, oh my gosh, the salaries of pharmacists, it's falling apart. And that is the instances of somebody starting at $35 an hour, $40 an hour, and is it because of a saturated market? Is it because of this or that? Are they perhaps part-time? 32 is kind of the new normal of what we're seeing here in Ohio. Tell us more, give us the data. What are you actually seeing when it comes to these numbers of, hey, I'm starting at 35 or 40? Is this isolated? Is it more widespread?
Hearing you say that makes me feel like maybe I'm the one that needs to collect those reports and that data, because no one is. You're right. It's all anecdotal. I've seen it in your Facebook group. I've seen people, report some of the offers that they're getting. It's abysmal. The worst I have heard is $28 an hour as a floating position. I think it was in Austin, Texas, or one of the major cities in Texas. And we know that these typically are retail chain positions that are offering these insanely low salaries. We also do have reports of it happening as well in hospital positions. And we also know that there are a few remote clinical positions that are very low as well. And so we're talking like MTM jobs where you've got a lot of flexibility. You work when you want to, but you're looking at an annual salary of maybe 70, 80,000. That's not true across the board, but that's what we are receiving reports from the people that get jobs. Because occasionally we do salary negotiations for people as well. But the only evidence we have as far as an actual report that's been shown that I enjoyed seeing this year was drug topics. So if you look at their 2020 base salary, you see this very concerning skew of data. And I'll send you a picture of this as well so you can put it in the podcast notes if you can do that. I don't know. But you'll see that 13%, which is a huge number of people at the end of their report, were receiving less than $70,000 a year or less. And unfortunately, what they didn't report in this data is the number of people in that bracket who were full-time or part-time. But we do know that the total amount of people was only 13% as well that worked part-time. So I'd have to venture a guess that 13% that worked part-time, potentially were majorly in that bracket of 13% reporting that. I don't know. But unfortunately, what we are seeing is because of the glut, because of how easy it is to hire a pharmacist, particularly in a very generic role, we are seeing a lower salary being offered to those pharmacists. And based on what we just talked about, that low ceiling, you should assume that you're not going to work your way to, the top tier salary, $120,000, $140,000 if you're being started at $70,000 annual.
And where you start matters for obvious reasons. It matters when you've got $175,000 of student loan debt. It matters when, hopefully, if you have something like an employer retirement match, 4% of 70 versus 4% of 120, that matters, over time and compound interest and growth. So question for you here, and I know this is more complicated than we have time to unravel, but what's the reason? What, is it simply that we've got supply and demand? We've got 13,000 plus grads coming out per year. Pharmacists aren't retiring at the rate that we thought they may. Is it more about the evolution of the pharmacist role, and we're seeing faulty business models and not only those that are being strained financially from existing models, but new innovative ones not popping up that could justify new positions. Like, what do you see as the main culprit here?
Supply and demand. I am not a labor economics expert.
Come on, Alec. No, I'm just kidding.
I did consider getting a PhD once, Tim, but no, not my thing.
And then you saw the light.
I did. But now what we have is this perfect storm, as I allude to in further of our salary guide. The perfect storm is approximately 14,000 pharmacy students graduating every year, entering into the job market. Approximately 1/3 of the current job market, so about 100,000 pharmacists, is looking for a new job. And that's based off of the AACP National Workforce Study.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have the US Bureau of Labor Statistics predicting a negative job growth from a 321,000 to, I think it's like 100 or 311,000.
Correct.
So, by the way, if numbers confuse you, if I'm saying a lot of numbers, check out the report. It's all there. Because if I was listening to this, I'd be like, what did you just say? But you've got this gestalt of a problem where each factor is creating a much more complex issue. But ultimately, what we have is the main positions that pharmacists take, i.e., hospitals and community pharmacy, and we're a dime a dozen. I asked on LinkedIn managers approximately how many applications do you get per job? And it was anywhere from 60 on the low end to, I think the highest was over 210.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are a smart manager, you are going to think, what is my biggest cost? Employees. So if I have that many people, am I going to give them a compelling offer when, if I don't get my top pick, I probably will get my second, third, fourth, fifth,
who are all pretty darn good,
maybe even my 15th pick.
Yeah.
Because someone's going to take this offer, right? We're pharmacists. We have a PharmD. We're doctorates. We're insanely capable people. So, getting your 15th pick isn't the worst thing in the world for them. For our profession, however, what suffers ultimately is our salary, our buying power.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer have that. And back in the 2000s, we had that inflated need, right? We needed pharmacists. You got signing bonuses. You got cars when you got offered a job. I don't know if students are told that anymore, but that's the way it was. And now everything's flipped on its head. We're in the exact opposite situation, albeit that there is a huge hiring phase happening right now simply because of the COVID jobs.
Yep.
We're seeing a ton of people, readily take those. But these pharmacists are just probably going to be in the same situation once this vaccination rush passes through. It isn't like we're going to need all those pharmacists again to vaccinate every single year. They're going to figure out cheaper ways. And everyone knows you can pay a nurse a lot less to vaccinate people. So this temporary demand is not going to last.
Now, I am, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Alex, my audience knows this. I am a half glass full type of person. And I will say the one thing, and it does not mitigate the concerns here, but the one thing that stands out to me here is, as I alluded to earlier, I do think we desperately need some innovation, thinking a little bit differently, people taking calculated risk. And when you've got $175,000 of student loan debt and you have a $120,000 contract that's there to sign, it's very hard to make an otherwise decision, right? I mean, it's classic golden handcuff situation. And I do think there's a lot of pharmacists out there that have great ideas. And one of the reasons we're so passionate about the financial plan side of it is that we know the financial pressures are very much connected to the career opportunities, the willingness to do either, whether it's starting something or even just enjoying the work that you do and having some choice. So I am hopeful. I am also concerned that lower salary and a debt load that continues to climb is a compound problem. But there is also perhaps an opportunity out there where folks may now say, okay, I could make 70 or I might go do this. And that I might go do this might be something that's of perhaps more interest or even an opportunity to pursue.
You bring up a really good point that I didn't consider in writing this guide is particularly for new grads, considering your career trajectory is insanely important. for determining your financial plan. Because if you think right now that now's a good time to be a clinician, trends are showing that, clinicians, people who are able to prescribe or have some sort of agreement with a doctor, those jobs, we're not seeing a major increase in those salaries. In fact, we're seeing students, or I should say residents, being offered less and less money. So, if you think you're wanting to make a lot of money later in your career and you're willing to work up to that, there are plenty of opportunities out there. We didn't even go over the fact that as a pharmacist, you're more than qualified to be a pharmaceutical sales rep.
Mm-hmm.
And that has an amazingly high ceiling. You could be paid insanely well. It is not a pharmacist job. It's not a typical one, but you are overqualified to do it. And if you have the ability, if you have those natural gifts to sell, the ceiling's really high. And so I think, this is something I didn't consider. So I'm glad you brought it up, Tim, that when considering your financial future, there is a space for you to take a job that pays you less if the trajectory, if the potential plan of that path could pay you a whole lot more. Because the reality is that as a clinician, your salary is not going to dramatically increase. One minor report that I didn't touch on in my report is that Drug Topics said 41% in their report reported additional income in 2020. Anywhere from the majority of them making around $1,000 to $5,000 in extra income. Now, they didn't say how they made that money, but the case is that people, they want to make more. They've got things to do with that money.
Yeah.
So consider your career trajectory wisely. If you're looking at the 175 and thinking, I need to pay this all down, don't make the mistake of rushing into a job that just pays well, but is a dead end.
That's right. Yep.
That's a risk. It's a risk to take.
Got to think about the 30 to 40 year timeline. And here we're talking salary, which is one component, but certainly not the only, right? We can have a pharmacist who's got multiple job offers, is making great money, but they may not like the work that they're doing or it may be stressful. So talk to us about satisfaction, job stress. Obviously, we know job stress correlates to the rate of dissatisfaction that pharmacists are feeling in their work. What did you find here in the reports as far as the number of pharmacists, percentage of pharmacists, generally speaking, that are either satisfied, dissatisfied in their work, and tell us more about those findings?
Your term earlier, golden handcuffs, I think captures the feeling that most have. According to Drug Topics, they reported 44% were unhappy with their jobs. About a third of the entire group that they surveyed was looking for another job because of their unhappiness with their current one. I think they asked some wrong questions in their survey, but in my interpretation, we're looking at 7 out of 10 pharmacists were not satisfied with their jobs. And we all practically know the reasons why pharmacists are unhappy across the board. But there are some other reports that show that we actually have a higher satisfaction score than that. Pay scale said that we're about a 74% satisfied, which was higher than what I thought. AACP said 58. But the pharmacists that were the most happy were those that were in independent community pharmacies, ambulatory care, or non-patient care, which kind of goes back to our problem. You and I have talked about this numerous times. We as pharmacists, we've got an identity crisis. If we're supposed to be patient care oriented, then why are people who are not in patient care more happy than those that are in patient care? Another survey question in that AACP report was that only 27% of people said or agreed to the statement, I feel happy at work. Grinds my gears. I'm supposed to be the happy pharmacist, but I'm not happy about that.
I mean, it's heavy. And, again, this goes back to your comment. I hope the new practitioners and even the students listening, are really thinking about the long horizon and trajectory. And this, again, goes back to for me, obviously, the financial plan and cost of living. If you rise your cost of living and everything that comes with it right out of the gates, because you're now going from negative 30 in debt every year to making 110, 120, it is very hard to walk that back. Very hard to walk that back. And if you can hold the line, and I understand certainly this is easier for me to say in Ohio or you to say up in Michigan, that may not be as easy for folks that are in higher cost of living areas. But if you could hold that line, especially as you're going through this transitionary period where you've got multiple competing financial priorities, you got typically big student debt loads. You're trying to really understand what you do or do not like in the work that you're doing. Give yourself options. We talk about all the time. Put yourself in the driver's seat rather than that being dictated for you. And I think, of course, this discussion certainly emphasizes that as well. Alex, I want to wrap up. You mentioned earlier in the episode talking about the Job RX. Tell us more about Job RX. You talk about that in the guide as well. What is Job RX, and what can folks expect to get from that resource?
Yeah, Job RX, it is a website from a friend of mine, mutual friend of yours, Kevin Miro. And I included it in this report simply because of some of this newer data that he's been finding in his job board. If you look at the powers that be, there is a pharmacy demand report which stated in the fourth quarter of 2020, only 12,000 new pharmacist jobs were created, which is not great, but not awful either, which, kind of just makes me think like, okay, doing the numbers in my head, it makes sense why we're getting 100 applications per job. But JobRx is essentially, it's a job board where it pulls in all these jobs from employers' websites into one place so that you can apply and get notified when the newest jobs are created. He reported to me that in December of 2020, they added 12,800 pharmacist jobs in 1 month versus this other demand report that said that that's how many jobs were created over the entire quarter. This gave me a lot more hope than I've ever had before because I've never been able to have access to that kind of information or technology that says, okay, what exactly is the job reports and how are you getting that data? He also, and I shared this in the report as well, that 16,000 pharmacist jobs were added in January of 2021. So when I hear these numbers, I am a lot more hopeful. I do think that they are slightly probably more than what we would expect simply because of the COVID hire, push that is going on. But ultimately, this is potentially an amazing resource for pharmacists to finally find the jobs that are out there. And I'll make one final note that from what I could tell, the vast majority of these jobs, though, were community and health systems related, long-term care, hospitals, things like that. So right now, I still know that the majority of the buzz, what everyone is selling as the promised land is the non-traditional roles, right? The pharma, the work from home, the remote. And those are still out there. They are possible, but they are certainly not as available as hospital and community jobs.
Absolutely. And our community can check that out, jobrx.com. We'll link to it in the show notes. I think certainly a resource that's going to afford us an opportunity to have some more real-time data, some more up-to-date information that I know will be helpful to not only pharmacists looking for positions, to perhaps I often found myself in a faculty administrative role trying to advise and help students looking for jobs. I see some value there as well. So jobrx.com, again, we'll link to in the show notes. Alex, where is the best place that our community can go to connect with you, to follow the work that you're doing, and to stay up to date on information that we're talking about here today?
I'd love it if you connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out. It's where I spend the most amount of my time. We do have, Instagram and Facebook, but after watching The Social Dilemma, I don't know. I'm just trying to stay on one and not try to give away too much information about my life. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love it to have a conversation with you. And I try to have one with every single person that connects with me. So that'd be a great place to check it out. Otherwise, you can go to thehappypharmd.com, where we've got a lot of resources, blogs about career paths, and of course, this salary guide.
Great stuff, Alex. We'll link to Alex's LinkedIn profile in the show notes, as well as, of course, thehappypharmd.com and the salary guide. Alex, thank you again for joining us and sharing your insights and expertise on this important topic as we talk about the state of the job market and our profession. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim, for having me.
Before we wrap up today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, I would like to again thank this week's sponsor, Insuring Income. If you are in the market to add own occupation disability insurance, term life insurance, or both, Insuring Income would love to be your resource. Insuring Income has relationships with all of the high-quality disability insurance and life insurance carriers that you should be considering and can help you design coverage to best protect you and your family. So head on over to insuringincome.com your financial pharmacist, or click on their logo or link in the show notes to request quotes, ask a question, or start down your own path of learning more about this necessary protection.